Never would I have thought that the same hands that raised my son would one day serve him as a maid. My name is Harper, and I'm 71 years old. I've worked my whole life as a domestic helper, scrubbing floors and cooking for families who never knew my name. But I did it all with just one goal, that my son Gavin would have a better future. I raised him alone after his father left us when he was only 2 years old. I gave up my dreams, my preferences, my peace, everything for him. A few months ago, Gavin and his wife Riley offered for me to move in with them. I was full of hope, assuming it would be an opportunity to be closer to my newborn granddaughter. But from the first day, I noticed something strange. Their gazes were cold, their words dry. They gave me orders disguised as suggestions. Harper, could you wash the dishes? Harper, could you clean the living room? All with a fake smile that hurt more than a shout. I told myself that nothing was wrong, that it was their way of showing tiredness, that things would get better with time, but they didn't. One day, while I was preparing lunch, I heard Riley mumbling that I was in the way, that I seemed like just another maid. I didn't know how to react. I just gritted my teeth and kept stirring the beans as if I hadn't heard a thing. My heart broke a little, but I still said nothing. The worst was yet to come. In the middle of dinner, Gavin said in a firm voice, without a shred of shame, "Mom, stop acting like the lady of the house. Here, you're just the maid." My body froze. I felt the blood drain to my feet. I looked at him, my soul ripped to shreds. So that's what he thought of me, after everything I had done. In that moment, I understood that something in me had died, but what he didn't know was that a stronger part of me was about to awaken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed with a blank stare, listening to Riley's murmuring as she talked on the phone in the living room. She laughed. She said things like, "It was about time your mother understood her place." Every word was like a thorn piercing my chest. How could they be so cruel? I asked nothing of them. I cooked, cleaned, cared for their daughter, without asking for a dime. And yet they treated me as if I were a burden. I remembered the years I spent cleaning strangers' homes up to 14 hours a day. I did it to pay for Gavin's education, so he would never have to go through what I had. I remember slipping small gifts under his pillow on his birthdays. Even when I had no money for food, I never told him, but more than once I went to bed hungry just so he would have warm milk when he woke up. I believed a mother's love was enough. How naive I was. The next morning, I pretended as if nothing had happened. I got up early, brewed coffee, and set out bread. Gavin came down without a greeting. Riley didn't even turn to look at me. They ignored me as if I were part of the furniture. As I sat down to take a sip of coffee, Riley looked at me and said without a care, "Could you sweep the yard today? It's full of leaves." She wasn't asking. She was ordering, as if I were an employee. Gavin didn't even look up from his phone. In that moment, something in me changed forever. I slowly stood up, took my cup, and went into the yard. As I swept, a strange calm came over me. I no longer felt pain, no sadness, only determination. That same afternoon, I secretly went to the bank and opened a new account in my name. I had saved a significant amount of money. The result of something no one, not even Gavin, knew about. If they wanted to treat me like a maid, I would show them that even the maid could be the one who paid all the bills and who also knew how to leave quietly, but with style. I returned from the bank with my head held high. In my bag, I had a copy of the contract confirming the opening of my new account, to which I had transferred a portion of the money I had been saving for years. This money didn't come from charity or luck. I had earned it through day and night work as a caregiver for an elderly lady, Mrs. Peterson, who left me an unexpected inheritance upon her death. I hadn't told anyone about it, not even Gavin. I thought I would use it one day to help him, but now I knew it was time to use it to help myself. That night, while Riley watched a show on TV and Gavin played on his phone, I locked myself in my room with a notebook. I began to make plans. It was no longer time to cry, it was time to act. I looked for rental properties in quiet neighborhoods, checked prices, called a real estate agency, and made an appointment. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope to start anew, far from the contempt and poison that prevailed in that house. The next day, I cooked as usual, washed everyone's clothes, and tidied everything.
Gavin barely spoke a word to me.
Riley complained that the rice was bland, but I no longer felt anger. I only observed, analyzed, weighed each step. I knew their contempt stemmed from the fact that they considered me weak. And that was partly my fault. I myself had taught them that they could treat me however they wanted and that I would accept everything with a smile. But that was over. The maid was about to disappear. Before I slept, I sat in front of the mirror and looked at myself carefully. My hair was more white than black, my skin marked by the years. But my eyes were alive. I looked at myself and promised that I would not die invisible, that I would reclaim my place. Perhaps I would never be recognized by them, but I would recognize myself. And at this age, that was enough. What they didn't know was that the time for doing favors was over. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. I only made coffee for myself, for the first time in years. I didn't set out bread or prepare breakfast for anyone. When Gavin came down, he looked at me in surprise. "Didn't you make anything to eat?" he asked, without even saying good morning. I replied calmly, "I have a few things to do today. I didn't have time." His brow furrowed. Riley came down later, saw the empty table, and let out an annoyed snort. I simply took my bag and left. I took a taxi to the real estate agency where I had my appointment. A very friendly young woman received me and showed me several apartments. Most were small, but cozy and sunny. I immediately chose one, 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a small balcony overlooking some trees. I loved it instantly. I paid the full deposit and signed the contract right away. The young woman looked at me surprised. "Would you like us to help you move?" I smiled at her and said, "Yes, but it would be a quiet move, very quiet." I returned home with a pounding heart. I spent the afternoon folding my clothes, organizing my belongings, and packing everything into black bags that I hid in my closet. No one noticed anything, neither Gavin nor Riley. That night, while they ate dinner, I pretended to be tired and went to my room early. I sat on the bed with the light off, breathing slowly in silence. Inside, a flame burned. I would leave. I would do it without screams, without explanations. I would make them feel exactly as they had made me feel, as if I didn't exist. But before I left, I had to teach them one last lesson. Something they couldn't ignore. Something that would hurt their pride, not their bodies. Because if you despise your mother, you have to learn that there are consequences, and I would make sure they learned. That night, while Gavin and Riley slept as if the world owed them peace, I was awake, packing the last things that belonged to me. It wasn't much, a box of old letters, a few books, yellowed photos, and some blouses that still smelled of lavender. I realized something. After everything I had given to that house, everything that was truly mine fit into one suitcase. And yet I felt richer than ever, because finally I would regain my peace. The next morning, I got up early. I pretended I was going to the market and left with my already packed bags. I took a taxi directly to the new apartment, and as I walked through the door, I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, the air was not heavy. I opened the windows, let the sun in, and felt my heart beat differently. This small place was modest, yes, but it was mine. No one would yell at me. No one would call me the maid. It was the first corner of the world where I alone had the last word. For 2 days, no one called me. No message, no missed call. It was obvious that they didn't care if I was there or not. I thought about returning, just to see how long it would take them to notice my absence. But I held back. They had decided to treat me like another piece of furniture, and I decided to disappear like one. But Gavin's indifference was not what hurt me most. What truly broke me was the thought that not a spark of gratitude remained in his heart, not even the curiosity to know where his mother was, until on the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was Gavin. I answered in a calm voice. From the other end, he sounded annoyed. "Where are you?" "Riley needs help with the child." "Aren't you coming back to do your part?" I closed my eyes and laughed softly. "My part," I replied, "I've already done that, my son, my whole life." And before he could say anything else, I hung up. I didn't know that this simple call would only be the beginning of a storm stronger than I had imagined. After hanging up, I put the phone on the table and poured myself a cup of coffee. My hand didn't tremble, I felt no guilt. For the first time, I was the one who hung up first. For years, I was the one waiting for calls, begging for a little attention, swallowing my pride over and over. But that Harper no longer existed. Now I was a woman who had learned to live without the emotional crumbs of a son who could only demand and never be grateful. That same afternoon, the messages began. You're really not coming. Riley can't bathe the child alone. You're abandoning us. I didn't answer any. I let them feel for a moment what it's like to depend on someone and for that someone not to be there. They, who had used me for months as a free employee, now realized how much I actually did. But it was too late. I was no longer part of their household machine. I was a woman with my own home, my own account, and intact dignity. A few days later, the desperate calls began, but they weren't calls of concern, but of anger. What do you think, Mom? Do you think you're better than us because you saved a few dollars? That's when I knew they had discovered I had money. They didn't know how much, but the suspicion was enough for them. I said nothing, neither denying nor confirming it. I let the doubt gnaw at them, because if someone sees you as a maid, they never imagine you could also be the lady of the manor.
Von night, Riley kellet me cruing.
She said they were going to lose their car. That the baby had gotten sick. They needed help, even just a little. She asked me to think of my granddaughter, but this plea didn't come from love. It came from fear. Fear of losing comforts, that the money would stop flowing, that I would no longer be as available as before. I hung up without saying a word. What they didn't know yet was that I was about to do something much stronger than just disappearing. I was going to shine. That same week, I contacted an old lawyer I had met during my working years with Mrs. Peterson, the woman who had left me her inheritance. I explained my situation to him, and he didn't hesitate to offer me a solution: to transfer a portion of my assets to a protected account, secured against any attempt at manipulation or extortion. I said yes without hesitation. I wanted to protect myself, but also to prepare for something bigger, because it wasn't just about money, it was about showing them who I really was. With his help, I began to search for properties in upscale neighborhoods. I didn't do it out of vanity, but as a message. I wanted them to know that the woman they despised had the power to live wherever she wanted. Life taught me never to humiliate anyone, but also not to remain silent when I'm trampled upon. And this time, I wouldn't hide. I would walk with my head held high, without asking permission, without knocking on doors that had already been closed to me. I visited several luxury apartments, and in one of them, the sales agent initially ignored me. He looked me up and down and asked if I was there on behalf of a gentleman. I didn't feel offended. I just pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and showed him my account balance. The ensuing silence was my best response. That same afternoon, I signed the contract for a property that made Gavin's house look ridiculous. But that wasn't all. I had a much more subtle plan. Shortly after I moved, I did something unexpected. I sent Riley a package. Inside were the keys to the house they lived in, accompanied by a note that read, "The house where you made fun of me was paid for with every dollar I earned scrubbing floors. Enjoy it while you can, because soon it won't be yours." She didn't know that I was still listed as the guarantor for the property, and least of all did she expect that I had already initiated the process to reclaim it. The lawyer explained to me that, although the deed was in Gavin's name, I had signed as the party responsible for the mortgage loan. That gave me a legal advantage I could use. We initiated proceedings to demand full payment or, failing that, to formally reclaim the house. I didn't do it out of revenge, I did it out of justice. I had built that house with my hands, with my double shifts, with my aching knees from all the scrubbing. They wouldn't take it from me so easily. When Gavin found out about the lawsuit, he came to me for the first time. He showed up unannounced at my new apartment, dressed as if his mere presence would sway me. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, in a tone more confused than hurt. I looked at him and answered calmly, "Because I am not the maid, and it's time you understood that." We didn't shout, we didn't cry. I just watched him leave, more angry than remorseful. His ego couldn't stand that his mother was fighting back. Days later, Riley called me, completely hysterical. She insulted me, accused me of trying to ruin their lives, of acting like a grudging old witch. She told me to think of the child. I listened in silence. When she finished, I said, "Remember when you said I was in the way? Now you'll see what happens when the obstacle takes away the very foundation of their home." She hung up furiously, and I felt lighter inside. I was no longer the silent woman who endured everything. I was the woman who was reclaiming what was hers. However, what I didn't suspect was that that same night, someone would try to break into my apartment by force. They didn't succeed thanks to the building's surveillance, but the terror was real. Was it a random robbery, or was someone not taking my decisions well? From that moment on, I knew that my fight was no longer just about respect, but about safety, and I would not back down. The next morning, I went straight to the building management and asked for access to the surveillance cameras. The security guard looked at me sympathetically and said they had already checked. It was a man with a hoodie, but no weapons, who only tried to break the lock before fleeing. They couldn't identify him, but I already had my suspicions. When a woman becomes inconvenient, there's always someone who wants to silence her. And if they couldn't do it with words, they might have thought they could do it with fear. I called my lawyer and asked him to file a formal complaint. I also hired a private security system. Cameras, sensors, alarms. I wouldn't lock myself in, but I wouldn't leave myself unprotected either. I had protected others my whole life. Now it was time to take care of myself. And while all this was happening, the legal battle over the house progressed. My lawyer told me we had practically won the case. It was a matter of weeks, and then Gavin and Riley's world would shake. One afternoon, as I was having coffee at a downtown coffee shop, I met an old acquaintance. She looked at me from head to toe in surprise. "You're Harper. I wouldn't have recognized you.
You look different, radiant."
I smiled, not because her surprise flattered me, but because I realized it was true. I no longer walked with my head down, no longer had hands cramped from subservience. Now my steps were firm. Every one of my decisions carried weight, and finally, after so long, I felt alive. But what came next, I hadn't expected. That same evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my granddaughter, on a neighbor's phone. She was only 5 years old, but she was crying and said her mother was angry and she didn't understand why they didn't love her anymore. I broke down, not because of Riley or Gavin, but because of this innocent creature, who was not at fault for anything. And I knew that the fight was far from over, because now I had to decide how far I wanted to go. That night, I couldn't sleep. My granddaughter's voice echoed in my head. She sounded so much like Gavin as a child, before pride turned him into someone unrecognizable. It pained me to know that such a small girl was already caught in a conflict she didn't understand. But I also knew that if I went back for her, I would fall into the same trap again. I couldn't save everyone. This time, I had to save myself first. The next day, I went to the park where I used to take Gavin as a child. I sat on the same bench as always, surrounded by mothers with their children, listening to laughter, crying, and life. There I allowed myself to cry, not out of sadness, but out of grief. I cried for the mother I had been, for the woman who allowed others to trample on her, and for the grandmother I couldn't be as I had dreamed. I wasn't ashamed. On the contrary, each tear was a cleansing, a way to let go of the past and make room for what was to come. That same afternoon, I received the news. The judge had made a decision. Gavin had 30 days to pay off the mortgage debt. Otherwise, the property would be legally transferred to me. I called the lawyer and asked him to formally notify everyone. I didn't want to confront anyone. I didn't want to shout or give speeches. I just wanted them to silently understand that the woman they called a maid had the strength to reclaim everything, and that she did it without loud words. But barely had I hung up when I received another call. This time it was Gavin. His voice sounded different. He wasn't angry, nor defiant, just broken. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I paused for a few seconds in silence. Not because I doubted my answer, but because I knew that there would be no going back from this conversation. And when I said, "All right, tell me when and where," I knew that the true confrontation was just beginning. We met in a discreet coffee shop, away from the hustle, where no one knew us. Gavin was already there, dejected, with a tired face. He was dressed sloppily, as if the past days had taken their toll on him. As soon as he saw me, he stood up uncertainly. I didn't hug him. I just sat opposite him, my hands on the table. For the first time, I was the one controlling the moment. He lowered his gaze and said softly, "I didn't know you hated me so much." I laughed bitterly. "I don't hate you, my son. I've just grown tired." He told me about his debts, how Riley had lost her job, how he barely earned enough to survive. He told me that they were going to sell the car, that the baby needed medication, that the situation had overwhelmed them. I listened in silence, without interrupting. Each of his words seemed like a plea, but there wasn't a single genuine apology, just excuses, justifications, fear. And yet, deep down, I wished he would say, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I'm sorry I disappointed you." But he didn't. Instead, he ended with, "Can you help us one more time?" And then I knew that nothing had changed. He didn't see me as a mother, not as a woman, not as a human being. He saw me as an ATM that had stopped working one day. I adjusted in my chair, looked him directly in the eyes and said, "This is the last time we'll see each other, Gavin. Don't look for me anymore." His face changed, tensed, his voice became shrill. "Are you willing to let your granddaughter suffer because of your pride?" Then I stood up and replied firmly, "It's not pride, my son. It's dignity, and it has cost me a lifetime to defend it."
He left the place without looking back.
As I walked down the sidewalk, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Riley. It just said, "You'll regret this, you ungrateful old woman." I deleted it without reading it completely, because what they didn't know was that they were about to discover who truly owned the house they lived in. A week later, the official notification arrived. The judge had approved the mortgage foreclosure. In other words, the house no longer belonged to them. The lawyer gave them 3 days to vacate the property. I didn't want to be there when they received the news. Not out of cowardice, but because I didn't want to see any more feigned tears or empty pleas. This time, I wouldn't let remorse be used as bait. I didn't fall for those kinds of tricks anymore. I went for a spa treatment. I drank jasmine tea. I looked at myself in the mirror with a clear face, without makeup, without guilt. That's when I understood that true luxury isn't in gold or jewelry, but in peace. That peace that had been denied to me for years because I bore the burden of a family that couldn't support me when I needed them most. Now, every decision I made was for me. Not to please, not to gain love, but just to honor myself. The days passed in a tense calm. Gavin didn't contact me, nor did Riley, but I knew they were up to something, until finally the judicial decision arrived. The judge had established temporary, joint custody with weekly supervised visits. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was a first step. I cried with relief. The child would have me near her again, no longer just as an invisible grandmother, but as a protective, recognized, and necessary figure. That was my true victory. Not the money, not the house, but her hug when she saw me enter the room. The next weekend, the little one came to my apartment with a small backpack and her old teddy bear. She saw me and ran into my arms.
Vi krit tåget her.
She asked me to make her cocoa with bread, to give her her favorite blanket, to sleep together like before, and with a full heart, I promised her I would do everything so she would never feel abandoned again. I told her, "I'm not perfect, my love, but I will always be there for you." And she looked at me with those eyes that healed everything. But just when I thought peace was finally mine, a call broke the silence. It was the lawyer. He told me Gavin had requested a full review of Mrs. Peterson's will, attempting to challenge my inheritance. He claimed I had manipulated a vulnerable old woman to get her assets. I was paralyzed. They not only wanted to hurt me as a mother, now they wanted to snatch away what I had built with years of sacrifice. And I knew this battle would be the hardest of all. My lawyer quickly reassured me. They have no evidence, just assumptions. This is a desperate tactic. But I knew that even if they didn't win, the harm they aimed for was different. My reputation, my peace, my honor. They wanted to tarnish me, to drag me into the same mud they wallowed in, and I wouldn't allow it. I requested access to all notarized records. I re-examined the will, Mrs. Peterson's handwritten letters, the recordings where she thanked me for caring for her like a sister. This time, I would crush them with the truth. I decided to go a step further. I contacted the same journalist who had spread my story months earlier. I told her everything. The challenge, the threat, the custody, the attempt to erase my life with lies. She offered to turn it into a television program. I hesitated, but I accepted, not for fame but for justice. If they wanted to shout lies to the world, I would answer with truths. I looked into the camera and recounted once again what it means to give everything for someone and receive betrayal in return. The report went viral, and as I walked down the street with my head held high, some recognized me, greeted me respectfully, told me, "You are not alone." Then I understood something that changed me forever. The maid I was didn't disappear. She transformed, because women like me, who clean houses and raise children, also have a voice, a story, and dignity. And when they get tired of abuse, they are capable of moving mountains. But the most shocking thing happened days later. I received an unexpected call. It was an older woman with a trembling voice. "I am Mrs. Peterson's sister. I saw your story. I want to speak with you personally." I agreed without thinking, and when I arrived at her house, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "My sister was right to trust you, and now I want to do the same." In her hands, she held a sealed envelope, and what was inside would change everything forever. The envelope contained a second will, drafted years earlier. In it, Mrs. Peterson made it clear that if anything were to happen with the inheritance, her younger sister should step in as guarantor. This woman, now standing before me, held it with trembling hands and told me, "You didn't manipulate anyone. My sister loved you like a daughter, and this is to protect you." In that moment, I knew Gavin had played his last card. I was no longer alone. I had support. I had a story. I had living memory. With this document in hand, the judge dismissed the challenge and declared the inheritance valid, legal, and final. Gavin didn't even appear for the last hearing. He sent a public defender, cowardly until the end. I, on the other hand, left the court with the same suitcase I had left his house with months earlier. But now I was not full of sadness, but of pride, because I had regained everything. My peace, my voice, my granddaughter and myself. A few weeks passed, and the child's custody stabilized. We began to establish a new routine. Afternoons of drawing, honest laughter, walks in the park, bedtime stories. I never spoke ill of her parents. I didn't have to. Children understand even in silence. One day as we were playing, she looked at me with those deep eyes and said, "Oh, you are my home." And then I understood that my story, despite everything, had not ended in ruins, but in roots. Today, I am 71 years old. I am no longer the woman who pretends not to hear when she is called a maid. I am the woman who knew when to leave and when to fight back. I don't regret loving. I only regret waiting so long to love myself. And if my granddaughter asks me one day why I left, I will tell her the truth, because the ungrateful throw you away when you no longer serve them. But if you stand up, no one dares to call you a servant again.